I am Amos Paul Kennedy Jr., and now I'm living in Detroit, Michigan. I became a printer sometime in December 1949. I did not fully embrace what I'm supposed to be until I was almost 40 years old. And what happened is that when I was 38, actually, I took my sons to Williamsburg in Virginia, and I saw a reenactment of letterpress printing there. And I was fascinated by it. So when I returned to Chicago, there was a place called Artist Bookworks, a community print shop where you could learn letterpress printing. And I took 2 courses under a woman named Pam Berry. And as I tell people, it's like falling off of a cliff. Gravity takes care of you. And I've been falling ever since. This print was actually started in 2005. The Alabama Arts Council, at the death of Rosa Parks, wanted to do an exhibition of her, an exhibition in honor of her. And I decided that I would do a series of her quotations. And it was going to be part of a much bigger piece about civil rights. So the initial ones were all done in pink and reds. And because of the success of that, because it was a very small edition, I decided to reprint it in an edition of 14 quotations. And it was extremely popular. The thing is that most people know the sanitized story of Rosa Parks as this woman who was tired after a day of work and wouldn't give up her seat. But she was actually a very involved in the civil rights movement. She was secretary of the Montgomery branch of the NAACP. She had been to, I think the place is called Highland in Tennessee, to study civil disobedience. So she was well versed in resistance to, and the other thing is that there had been a history in Montgomery of blacks protesting against segregation, especially on the buses. And so hers was the case that the community decided to take up and to actually confront the powers that be. Yeah, I have reprinted it 3 times. And the first time it was printed in an edition of about 15, and that was 4 different quotes, I think, printed 15 times. The second time it was an edition of 100, and each edition had 15 quotes in it. And then this one, I've done a couple on Hammermüller, I've done them on chipboard, so it's all over the place. I just print because I like to print. This is very meaningful. So I have printed it several times, and I am seriously contemplating reprinting it, but for the last time, because there's other things I want to do. But I think I may do it one last time, because it is one of my more popular series. My technique is simple. I put ink on paper, and the process is in the moment. So most of what I do is in the moment that I'm printing. And I do research on the subject matter in order to come up with the quotations and that sort of thing. But when I start to print, it is just, I am printing. Initially, one thing I'm known for is the layers. And so initially the layers were, they had some relationship to the text on top, but as I matured, it became more definite, more intentional. And so when you look at something like the Rosa Parks, you'll see that there's one layer that has dates that are significant to her life. There's another layer that has places that are significant to her life. And this continues for about 4 layers. Because one of the things I like to do is I envision people having an aha moment where that poster is on the wall for a considerable amount of time, and they see it every day, but suddenly they turn their head a certain way and they say, oh, Montgomery's behind there. I've never noticed that before, and then that will draw them in and to look and study it more. Because there's nothing more fascinating than to find the new in the familiar. Letterpress printing is a form of relief printing, and it has come back in favor or in popularity since probably about 1990. But it was once the only way that things were printed, mass-produced, until offset replaced it. And so what happened was that this decline of letterpress started much earlier, but by the time the 60s and the 70s, it was definite. And the equipment became extremely cheap because it was just getting rid of it. And what happens is that when a commercial printing process is no longer commercially viable, it becomes art. And this was what was occurring with letterpress printing. And so we have a lot of letterpress printers who do fine print books, broadsides, things of this nature. And there are also a growing number, and I think it's even more, that are doing wedding invitations, business cards, greeting cards for the public. But they are more or less looking at targeted markets, and so it is not something for the general public. So letterpress printing has come back as a way of disseminating information. But I have taken to letterpress printing posters, but this I call an oversized greeting card. And so I print these because it's more in tradition of the show card posters that were very popular from the 1870s up until the 60s and 70s to advertise things like carnivals, circuses, musical acts, and things of that nature. And so they were meant to be ephemera. And I like that. They were also meant for the public, not just for a niche of people who can afford, $2,000 for wedding invitations. And so I like that. I like the ability of putting these things out. It works well with what I consider the democratization of art. That is, art that is affordable for everybody and anybody. I have always been fascinated in Proverbs because Proverbs are these little jewels of wisdom, normally in 10 words or less. And for every proverb, there's a proverb that counters it. So it really becomes judgmental for you to figure out which one. And so I like Proverbs, I like aphorisms, and there are quotations that I like by people that I want to put out there. I prefer that over poetry or an essay because of the brevity of it and the fact that people can really relate to it. And so I'm constantly reading and gathering Proverbs. I've been at it so long, people will bring me things that they want, that they think are humorous, are meaningful, and they would like to see in a poster. And I have a long list, and so I just go through and I just print what I want to when I want to. But it's the brevity of these sayings that attract me to them most. Well, satire is a way of addressing sometimes what you want to call the power structure without creating too much havoc. There's always been a need for, in the King's Court, there was the jester, and then there's always been a need for people like Will Rogers and Dick Gregory to say there is humor, but then this humor also reflects the pain that's being caused. And a lot of times people can deal with that or reflect upon it much better if these two are brought together in a saying, in a script, or in a play where they can't if it's very heavy-handed. People sometimes classify me as a political artist, and I find that amusing because when I was young, I was told that everything you do is political. And so sometimes people say, well, how can you do something by Fannie Lou Hamer and then turn around and do this funny little saying that you just did? And I said, well, technically what I'm doing is I'm reflecting the world that I want to live in. And that world is not stark and all political. It varies. And I print the things that I think reflect the way that I want the world to be. I think that people who say that they are not political in their work fail to recognize that not being political is a political act. and you are political. I say the painter who paints the very beautiful landscape of a farm is being political just as much as the painter who paints the struggles of, factory workers. It's just that you don't think of that as a political act. Oh, that's just a beautiful. No, that's saying, look, this is the way I want the world to be. This is, my vision of the world. And so my vision of the world will exclude the factory worker. Well, why does it? Why is it that both exist but you don't recognize both? I do what I do because I have to pay my rent. Yeah. And that's what I do. People ask me what's my motivation. I tell them I have to pay my rent. And so I have to find a way. We live in a civilization where money is an important component. So I have to find a way to make a living. And so I have been able to make a living doing this. But one thing about printmaking or printing is that you make multiples. So that means that I can get more out there, which means that in order to make a living, I just have to create a volume large enough to sustain myself. And anything that I deem excess, I can give away. And that people don't feel like, oh, I just paid money for this and you gave it to someone else, because they recognize that, oh, I'm helping you live, Amos. And one of the things that you like to do is give things to people, because it's a way of spreading my message. So this is one of the big things that I do, is that but through printing I'm able to spread the message that I have. I guess for me the image is the positioning of the text on the page. And so what kind of shape does it make? Where's the hierarchy in the words that I'm working with? I don't really design or do sketch work. Most of my work is done right at the press as I'm printing. Most of my work is actually centered and justified. And that is because when I started making posters, I was living in the South, and the vernacular of the signs that people would make and put up was centered and justified. So it's easy for people to read. There are these graphic designers who do these very imaginative and creative layouts, but they're not really designed for the common citizen. They're designed for those people who are graphically aware, who have that background that they have, so they can see it on a slant or a curved line, and they appreciate that. But what I want is I want people really to read the message. And so that is the important thing. So this piece is by Kerry James Marshall, who is a famous artist in Chicago, but he's actually, I think he was born in Birmingham, Alabama, and 3 days later his family left for the north, but Birmingham claims him. But this piece, one of the reasons I like it is because these people here are all martyrs from the civil rights movement that many people kind of know of but don't know. These little girls were at the 16th Street bombing. These were the 3 civil rights workers who were killed in Mississippi. And there's Malcolm X. And here we have Fred Hampton. I don't know who this gentleman is. And then these two everyone knows, King and Kennedy. And you have this image of the person looking out at you as opposed to looking at these martyrs. But this is one of the pieces that, all the pieces in here are extremely powerful, and you should take a look, because some of them come from the 40s and the 50s, and you can see how issues really haven't changed. I mean, we have this issue that it's right there right now. Black people running for progress and against violence, and how is it dealt with, and this is 68. So the thing is that this struggle has not ended. What happens is that it's reshaped. And I think that this is one of the things that people who make stuff really have to do, is address the injustices in the society. And I think it is inherent in you as a human being to seek justice for all. Because as Fannie Lou Hamer said, if I am not free, well, she said something like this, no one is free until everyone is free. And this is true. For me to disrespect you is for me to disrespect myself. It's only when we have total respect for each other that we will have the society that we want. And this is what these works do and convey to me. This whole thing is a struggle for humanity. I once said that I will not let the inhumanity of this civilization deny my humanity. So the thing is that it's one of the things about me being human is that I must destroy the inhumanity that is so inherent in this civilization. Yep. So those are the pieces. And we can take a look around at others.
Who's this artist?
Oh, that's not an artist, that's a printer. Yeah. Just, bribed someone, Bribes still work in this civilization. Please put that in.
We